Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
It is I, the one who knows.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
A geek for fun.
And a geek for evil.
Oh no! It has been a hot minute everyone. I'm so sorry to have disappeared. Obviously I had another kid.
How fucking dare you.
Early. Yeah, I know. She came a lot earlier than we were expecting. She was about 2 weeks early. It was funny, we were just having dinner one night and Haley wasn't feeling good, which was pretty normal for her, but then just right in the middle of Leah and I eating dinner, she goes, Ian, I think we need to go to the hospital and get me checked out. I'm like, okay. And then it just kind of happened. I just texted the guys like, hey, no show this week, because I think we were recording like that night or the next night or something. And I'm like, yep, no show this week. We gotta go have a baby. So I don't remember what we were supposed to talk about for next time. It would have been pretty funny to just come back and act like nothing happened. But 9-month hiatus? What the fuck are you talking about? No, 10-month at this point. But yeah, so it's exciting. It's good to be back. I will preface that, you know, there's the possibility I'll have to bow out momentarily or something if baby starts screeching real bad. But talk to Haley about it. She's on super mom duty, so go Haley. She's the best around, and ain't nobody gonna keep her down. And hopefully we can get back to our regularly scheduled programming. May see some larger gaps. I don't know if we'll be able to go back to full weekly or not. It might just be twice a month as opposed to 4 times a month. We'll see. But I am just excited to be back. It's a lot of fun. I missed you guys. I missed you guys so much.
I missed you too.
We missed you too,
Yeah.
bruh.
Alright, so anyway, tonight I decided I wanted to come back and talk about something that's just kind of been on my mind lately. Some conversations I was seeing online just kind of put it more to the forefront. So I wanted to talk about historical revisionism within the context of fan communities. And that's a really smart way of saying, why do people think the Star Wars prequels are good now?
I'm glad this is where we're starting. Because you're fucking right. Where the hell were you people 20 years ago?
Not born,
That's true.
I think is ultimately the answer.
That's probably correct.
But no, like, there just seems to be, like, these massive shifts, and I'm not sure how much of it is, well, I grew up with it, and I wasn't there to really talk about it as it was coming out, and how much of it is just, like, no, like, it was really good the whole time. I was there when it came out, and I was just pretending it was bad. I don't know, there's a very weird shift happening with a lot of things. And I've even seen it just a tiny bit with my personal cross to bear in this world, the Green Lantern movie. I've seen little snippets of people going, this movie's actually pretty okay. It's really funny because just that movie is like infamously bad for some reason, at least in like the public view. So yeah, I thought it'd be a fun thing to sit down, talk about, and get into, and get what our thoughts and feelings are on explanations for why this is becoming more of a thing than it used to be, if it is more of a thing than it used to be, if I've just got selective memory, yada yada yada. We'll get into the whole thing. But yeah, let's start with just the really obvious one. Why are people pretending that the Star Wars prequels were good?
So I've got a thing about this more generally that I think also connects to the Star Wars stuff. So I'll go there real quick. Something that I've had a problem with for a while that ties into this topic is there's a difference between we have aged and grown and matured and changed our minds about something and realized that what it was 20 years ago is different from who we are now 20 years later, and we're able to kind of meet it where it was a little bit more. And that would be like an actual reevaluation. And then there are the people who are like, I was right the entire time, and I just have not stopped talking about it for 10 years. And at that point, it's just, I have refused to change my mind. I have refused to grow and meet where I am at this point in time. I have just anchored so much of my identity towards this thing that I can't backtrack now. The example for that, in my opinion, would be like Man of Steel. I think there's a lot of people who who really loved Man of Steel when it came out and have just refused to ever cede any ground on that. And now that people are coming around on Zack Snyder a little bit for God knows what reason, they're acting like their process of not maturing and changing is the same as someone else changing their mind, and I don't think they're the same thing. Me, for example, I loved Man of Steel when it came out. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was like the best Superman movie ever. And then the older I got, the more I'm like, actually, no, this is kind of bad. This is not great. Opposite direction with Batman Returns. When I was a kid, that movie terrified me. I didn't like that movie at all. I thought it was terrible. But then over the years, it's changed, and now it's my favorite Batman movie. I think it's great. Star Wars prequels, I think, fill this ground because Star Wars is a thing that never stops coming out and has never stopped coming out. Back in the Geekvolution days, something Captain Logan and I would talk about is this whole idea of what is this generation Star Wars? And the problem with that idea in hindsight is this generation Star Wars, in quotes, is just Star Wars. Because Star Wars never fucking went away after the expanded universe came into existence. And so when the prequels came out, by that point, by like episode 1 forward, you always had Star Wars shit. Constantly. All the time. Always and forever. And so every movie that came out was then followed by a slew of video games and TV shows and animated features and toys and books and comics. And then they would just keep going and going and going. And the more that came out, the more it would retroactively justify stuff you saw in those movies. And I think Star Wars is a very good sort of microcosm of people aren't loyal to the material. They're loyal to the brand. I don't think people are gonna sit here in isolation and have these conversations in general about the quality of episode 2, but they're gonna have a lot of fucking conversations about everything in episode 2 that pays off over the course of 20 years of content. And that, I think, is the problem for me, where because you're always consuming Star Wars, and you just never have the emotional distance to say, is this thing on its own terms actually any good? Or is it just part of a wash of Star Wars that you can't disengage from? And most of the time it's the latter, not the former.
Alfie, what are your feelings on this? Because you've been quiet.
Oh, we're just making sure everyone got their points across. I think Steve covered a good majority of one side of a lot of this has happened. Is definitely the people that won't cede ground. It's 2025 and you still see Snyder Cut hashtags under every single DC post, so that's never going away. And there's also the people who have just grown up and reevaluated stuff. So I'll give 2 examples for some other things that I feel like justify, because I'm more on the side of this. I generally see this 9 times out of 10 as a good thing versus it being necessarily a bad thing. But for me, one thing that is like, I guess I've always liked this and now it's nice to see people turning around on it, would be the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise in the video games. I've always, since I've been a little kid, always been like, oh, these games rock. I love these. I have a lot of great time with these. And then I've aged. I've stuck to that. And the 2010s were a dark time to say you're a Sonic fan publicly, man. That was a rough go. And then the movies came out, and then people started looking back on the older stuff in contrast to the new Sonic games, where they did kind of like try to cater to an audience that didn't like the more edgy material. And people were like, oh, you know what? Maybe this edgy material wasn't. It was jarring when it came out in the 2000s, maybe for us, but now we can look back on it and be like, oh, this is actually good. So that's one. Star Wars prequels, like I said, I like the Star Wars prequels when I was younger, and as I've grown older. I've shifted from liking them just because I like Star Wars to now I genuinely am really interested in George Lucas as an artist, and I think everything about how he made those movies as indie films is super, super interesting, and how much they pushed the technology at the time and kind of saw what was coming with filmmaking and everything in terms of that franchise building, and he did that just out of his own pocket. I think is super, super interesting. And that helps enhance a lot of the choices made in those. And then one that I was like, oh, I hated this vehemently, and then quite recently I've changed my mind on is kind of directly related to Steve, is that's Bleach. For the longest time, I was very diehard, like, Bleach is ass, I don't like anything about this, I think it's lazy, etc., etc. And then Steve's a big fan of Bleach, Aaron's a big fan of Bleach, and just getting older, I've kind of just have less hate in my heart, except for certain things. I decided, you know what, there's this 3 in 1 volume's pretty cheap, why don't I, see if we can look into it, and I read it, and I'm having a great time, I'm enjoying it, so it's just like, I've been able to kind of get over myself on that aspect, over the fandom, war bullshit that dominates your teens, and re-look at a piece of work and see what its merits. It will ever be my favorite thing? No, but I can now appreciate it for what it is in a way that I couldn't before, and I think that's happening to a lot of people, especially as we're seeing so many creative outlets be kind of forced through sludge and all these different kinds of algorithms and the most market appeal, and they have to get crowd reactions and people have to share the clips on their phones. Like, the idea of like movies and games and things are being so stripped away from kind of the rawness of what you got. I think a lot of people are going back to the older stuff and they're finding a connection to where, yes, did this have its flaws? Yes, was this made in a way that wasn't the best way it could have done, but you can see more of a heart underneath it all. Even the corporate slop in the 2000s is very different to the corporate slot in the 2020s, and I think that does appeal to a lot of people who are feeling like kind of how every generation feels, but it's never been bigger now, of like, oh man, did we miss out on something? Were we born too late? Did we miss the golden age of films and games and media where you'd get a new game every year, and now it takes 7 years for a game to drop, or every MCU movie is a shadow imitation of, even if you like the MCU, right, of like the things that came before it. So I think that's a big part of it. I think it's a lot of it comes in direct contrast to the current era and people looking back on it and directly comparing it to what's coming out.
I think that's a fair point. I do think that the landscape for really big popular media over the last, like, it just in the pandemic era from 2020 on has been pretty terrible. There's not many movies that have come out, like blockbuster style movies, that really feel like event movies and everybody's talking about them and into them. Things seem like they're getting more niche and just really sloppy, and there's this definitely is a trend that started in the 2010s of following like the social media buzz and trying to cater to everybody kind of thing, but it seems like it's getting particularly bad in the 2020s, to the point where, like, especially post the election, where now political messaging is being told by corporate to take a backseat because obviously not people don't like left-wing political messaging, so it's better to just say nothing than to possibly offend, an audience or whatever. Then, to its credit, meanwhile, you look at George Lucas in 2005 literally having Palpatine quote George Bush in the
Right.
speech in which he becomes emperor. Like, that feels like the ballsiest decision ever, but I remember being there and being like, that just feels Like, so it just feels so desperate. It doesn't feel like it really means anything. It's just the vibe of the time was more like, yeah, it's not that I disagree with your message, because even in the 2000s I was like, fuck George Bush. I had a t-shirt that had a date on it. It was Bush's last day in the 2000s. But like, it just felt of the time like shoehorning the political message in a way that didn't feel natural to the story. I remember was the reaction at the time, and maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It's like something you could, discuss, and that's kind of an entirely different topic. But I do remember that being the reaction. So it's kind of funny to look back now, and now you've got like the new Captain America movie came out, and the president's the bad guy, and they were still too afraid to like really pull the trigger on that shit.
Right.
That movie is so bad, dude. It's so bad.
I haven't watched it, so I can't comment too much. I've just like seen the reactions, and I'll wait 10 years for everyone to call it like brilliant political commentary. But like, I just it just didn't look very good from the trailers and stuff. It's disappointing because I quite like the idea of Sam Wilson, Captain America, even if Nick Spencer really fucked the dog and pony show up. But here we are.
To your point, another movie in that era, this would have been a few years later, but it still would have been like the tail end of the Bush years leading into Obama, that had a finale that was very politics centric, that was derided at the time, but people have come around on as part of the ending, is the Dark Knight, because the whole like surveillance thing at the end, people used to complain that plot point was kind of tacked on, and it felt like it wasn't part of the larger story, and that Lucius Fox's like one throwaway line about it was really clumsy and bad. But like, you go back and watch that movie, and that finale is a very natural extension of what that whole movie is about, which is Bruce Wayne learning that Batman has limits, and that him constructing Batman out to be this thing that is limitless in an ideological sense can only lead to a corrupting force like the surveillance state he creates. And that's something that I don't think people were really ready to admit at the time, because we were so close to it, and we hadn't quite gotten to where we are today to make all that make a little bit more sense. It's like one of those things where, like, if you try to write a parody of the 2020s in 2010, nothing that you could write could be quite as absurd as where we are now. And if you tried to write where we are right now, people would think you're crazy. But to the Captain America point, another thing about this that kind of bugs me is companies are really good now at weaponizing things like representation in their corporate slop. And so you get movies like The Marvels or Captain America Brave New World. And Brave New World is a really good example of like the Disney machine at its peak, because that movie is very invested in the idea that other people in that movie will refer to Sam as Captain America. But it's not interested in the idea at all of trying to create a character around Sam Wilson as Captain America. In that movie, he has no ideology, he has no moral dilemmas, but people keep calling him Captain America, and that's supposedly a good thing. And so you get a lot of people who are like rage baity because they don't want a black Captain America, they don't want a Marvel movie starring women. And then everyone who sees that can be like, you're just racist, you're just sexist, and you can shield that movie from like any sort of authentic criticism. And so when you start tying your whole identity into this brand, and this brand has gotten smart about playing into your identity into it without doing anything sort of meaningful, then you do kind of get this revisionism too, because it starts to feel like it's a more personal attack on you when someone says this movie that is bad, because it starts to feel like you need to justify this choice because you've spent so much time and effort into it. And Brave New World, it's not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination, and all of its politics are like purely gesturing at things. Most of it is entirely meaningless, but there are so many people whose only take on that movie is, isn't it cool that there's a Marvel movie where the president's the bad guy? What about everything that happened in the movie? No, that's not important. Did anyone watch the movie?
No,
No,
Steve.
apparently
no, they
not.
didn't. Yeah. I think that like it's an interesting dilemma because it feels. I feel like the corporate influence on film is something that's like always there, but it feels particularly invasive now. And that might just be that I'm more aware of it now than I used to be. But like, you kind of look at the way that they've set up this thing of, well, the president's the bad guy, so that seems like that should be very subversive. And so it kind of like gets butts in the seats and it buys them goodwill essentially. But the problem is when you like look at the text of the movie, it's not really saying anything about that. It's not really putting anything out there to confront that the president is the bad guy.
100%.
And so that just it puts it in this very like weird way of, if you're one of those people who gets really, really triggery about, you know, social justice warriors, blah, 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 diversity stuff is bad because it's bad, then you're not going to watch the movie anyway. If you're one of those people who's, like, all about diversity and inclusion, well, it's like, hey, look, it's a black Captain America, so you gotta, like, it puts a certain group of people into a way of they feel like they have to go out and support and see this movie. But then the people in the middle that, like, don't get triggered like babies but also don't really care for black Captain America luckily don't have to be offended by actually going to watch the movie.
No, they're not,
you know, it's like
time and money.
Yeah, it's trying to appease as many people as possible, and it just feels very hollow. But I feel like we might be getting a little bit away from the more revisionist side of things. We might just be talking about more general slop of the modern era. So if let's take that as one of the things that is contributing to the revisionism is just a lack of good popular content in the modern era. That's one of the things. Is there something else to it? The one that I think we haven't really talked about a lot yet is it just that people grew up and weren't a part of the conversation and now they're trying to defend the thing they liked growing up?
That's definitely part of that.
Yeah, I think that's a huge bit of it.
Yeah, I think as well, specifically part of something with that is the fact that with the rise of social media and the internet, you see a lot more fan bases becoming a thing, and even outside of, like, if you're a fan base of a specific franchise, like film Twitter is a thing, right? And there's like people who are specific fan bases of certain directors, and it's never been easier and more convenient to follow like a through line and associate yourself as, oh, I'm this guy, right? And I grew up at this, and then I'm talking to other people who grew up on this, and I didn't get a chance to meet them before because they were from a different country, they're from a different part of the world, or maybe they were in the exact same town as me, but I just never met them, right? And therefore, we connect, we make those voices louder. You've got places like YouTube where people will make video essays about this who like grew up on these things and be like, this is why, and then their fans will go into the comments and stuff. So it kind of like, it builds and builds and builds and spreads and spreads and spreads to where it feels like, oh, these people just kind of came out of the woodwork, when really it's more of an effect of people get to the point where they find communities which they've had these beliefs for a long time, they connect, they join, the voices get louder, etc., etc. So I think that's a big part of it, especially in the case where there's a lot of competition between that. There's always that, like, kind of like a sports team of, like, you gotta prove it, your guy's the correct one, your one's the right opinion. So a lot of people will bolster voices through that.
I would agree. I think that the like nicheness of fan communities on the internet definitely helps like bolster these claims, because, you know, like, I never hated the Star Wars prequels, right? I just thought they were like flawed but interesting films, more or less. Like, I always thought they had their moments. I remember doing the Star Wars Day video with Bobby years ago now, where we watched every Star Wars movie in one day and like did a quick thoughts and review during the credits of each film before we loaded up the next one. And we're talking about like the Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith, because Jar Jar takes a break in between those movies, and we're like, isn't it kind of funny that like Jar Jar is ultimately the one that's responsible for Palpatine becoming powerful? And then like years later we get this fucking Darth Jar Jar theory, and it's like that's pointed out as like the one thing of the most evident, at like the highest point of evidence is Jar Jar was secretly working with Palpatine because he's the one that elects him for emergency powers left, right, and center. And it's just really like us, being shitposting and talking, being funny, but like there's that kind of moment of interaction outside of being just me and my friend in real life sitting there talking about this thing, getting to like have an internet community sit there and talk about it and like fester on it, and instead of like, oh, that's kind of funny, it becomes like, no, but what if it's really like part of this master plan? Because Lucas was all about the master plans, because he thought of like Darth Vader being Luke's father from the very beginning. That's because Vader means father in German. It's like, nah, that was just a weird coincidence, and he just didn't want to admit it. Like he just lied to you guys and said that he thought about it from the beginning, but he didn't. You could watch other versions. He wasn't called Vader at one point.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting distinction there between like having your friends do this kind of stuff versus being on the internet. When you're like a kid and you grow up in an area that has its own sort of like specific regional sports franchise, like if you're in New York and you're like a Yankees fan or something, there's a certain level of that kind of makes sense because the Yankees have their stadium in that area. There's all that Yankees merch everywhere. Everyone in New York is always talking about like the Mets or the Yankees, and so like because you're part of this community that is represented by this one sports team, your identity is really tied up into it, and you start to feel like you have to take up for it, or it's your favorite team by default. A lot of people now have like, there's your sports team that's your favorite because that's where you grew up, and then there's your actual favorite sports team that you discover later in life. And for whatever reason, people will have these two as equal footing, even though they very clearly prefer the one that they discovered and not the one that they just grew up with. But it's just a part of you, like you go home and see your family and you're all watching the Yankees game or something. But then the internet is a whole separate thing when it comes to communities. And I made a Twitter thread about this a while ago, but I'm starting to curve off this opinion that there's like a film Twitter, there's a comics Twitter thing, because I don't think that once you like break down what you're trying to talk about, that these things actually really exist. Because if you're on Twitter and you write a post about like, I don't know, like a David Lynch movie, then you're not necessarily going to get tweets from a specific group of people that have an insular base, that are all together all the time, that can't be separated, that are all talking about David Lynch movies. What you're going to get is, because you put the word David Lynch into your tweet, you're going to start being fed via an algorithm other people that have put David Lynch into their tweet, some people who really like him and some people who really don't like him. And suddenly you're constantly in this feedback loop of arguing with people whether or not they agree with you about David Lynch. And so these communities aren't like barricaded off. They're not like real people that you can meet and you can talk to and have like a regional association with. It's just the more you talk about a thing, the more you're exposed to other people who talk about the thing sans any sort of context. And so you start saying things like film Twitter or comics Twitter because you keep tweeting about Batman and people with Batman opinions show up. But if those people just tweeted about like the Jets game, then they will be on Jets Twitter. It's not like you occupy a physical space. You're just being moved back and forth. And I think that's part of the problem that you run into with fandoms and revisionism is you start having to find yourself in arguments with people that you can't contextualize in the same way that you would in real life, but you can't, because they're real people, you're treating the internet fake space like it's a real space. And so these arguments you're having start getting weirdly personal, and they really don't have to. So, like, if you say you really like David Lynch on Twitter, and someone who's being fed David Lynch tweets on their feed because they tweeted they don't like him sees your tweet and they're like, no, fuck you, David Lynch is the worst, you're an idiot. Well, now suddenly you're in this antagonistic back and forth where you have to like make concessions and dig your heels in on a thing that you probably wouldn't have if someone just didn't reply to you. And that's not a thing that would happen in real life. In real life, if I'm not going to go to like a coffee shop and just exclaim to the crowd, I like David Lynch. And then someone isn't just going to come up and start having an argument with me about it. I will be quiet, and then if someone does that, I'm just going to leave. And that's not a thing you can do on the internet.
And like what makes it worse with internet interactions is, I've seen people say it. Like, I've actually seen people express this in words to me, in written language. Well, if you walk away or you leave, then you're just admitting that you lost. And I just,
like,
it
fucking
feels bad.
8-year-old mentality, dude.
Right? But it feels like that's, but you know, like, deep
Ian's
in your
newborn
heart,
daughter has more self-control than that.
But, like, it can really bother you, because that's the way, like, and you'll see people like, oh, well, he stopped engaging, so clearly I was right.
Right.
Like, no. I just walked away because this is a stupid, like, what's the point of the conversation? You know, there's also just the fact that, like, studies have shown that people don't actually change their minds. Like, you can always find examples, and I think no one wants to admit they don't change their mind. But you can find examples of people who, like, talk about how they had this radical moment of mind changing, but by and large, those are, like, the exceptions that prove the rule. Because there's been, like, scientific studies that, like, when you talk to someone about it, it doesn't even have to be, like, a really deeply held belief. Like, they always talk about this at like, jobs and, like, bars. No politics, no religion, because those are, like, the big ones. But, like, it can be sports teams, it can be comic book characters, it can be anything. If you talk about something to someone and it is just important to them, then, like, biologically having to defend their opinions on it, they feel like they are being physically attacked. It can act like, not every single person feels this way, but it is a remarkably widespread phenomenon that putting someone into a situation where they have to defend or talk about their deeply held beliefs can actually put them into fight or flight mode. And so, no wonder people have a hard time communicating about it, but no wonder they also get, like, into these fucking rabbit holes of conversations about shit that, like, if they took 2 seconds to, like, take a step back from it and would probably just admit, yeah, this is fucking stupid, why am I wasting my time?
So
Yeah.
I'll say one more thing. Sorry. I'll say one more thing real quick, and then I'll shut up, because I just want to piggyback off of your point and then get back to the revisionism thing. But real quick, remember when we had this conversation when they cast Hal Jordan for the new Lanterns TV show? And people were like, oh my god, this guy's not Jewish, he can't play Hal Jordan. And I messaged you and I was like, when the fuck did Hal Jordan become Jewish? When was this a thing? I don't understand this. But
never know that.
there's that, and then there's like a fan base that's like, Selena Kyle is black in canon. I can't believe that they made a white Selena Kyle. I'm like, what the fuck canon are you talking about? She's been white for like 60 years. But that's part of what this is, right? Is like, you see a thing that you like, and then you say something about it, and then you get like boxed into a corner where you can't now unsay it. Now you just have to dig your heels into and say this all the time. And so, like, that revisionism starts to be like, I thought it was cool that Selena Kyle was black, then turns into, Selena Kyle should always be black, and if you don't think she should be black, then there's something wrong with you and you don't read the comics. Meanwhile, you can read every Batman comic ever and discover that she was not black for a majority of her history. But that's beside the point.
And then you can also do the reverse of it, right? Oh, because she's a thief, she has to be black,
right?
Huh?
Right. Anyway, sorry, Alfie, you can continue. I just wanted to make that point.
You're okay. I just wanted to say, I feel like that's kind of a trap that's easy to fall into, and something. Let me say, as someone who's more online than either of you, I'll own that. But I think as a result, I've had a little bit more success in being able to have some more fruitful conversations with people. And what I found is, I think you just have to learn to, like Ian, you were saying, when people can be viewed as an attack when you're like initially present them on the defensive. I think a more structured way to, because Steve, you're right as well. Like online talk isn't like what you would have with real people. And I think when people try to approach it like that and it doesn't work like that, that's what leads to the anger and frustration. If you just engage with it as, okay, this is a different form of communication, the best way I found is to passionately present your stance in a way that's not combative. Like, just be like, oh, I really love this because this, and this. If you're ever interested in this, check this, and this out. I've had a lot of times with, like, Superman, for example, or certain games or what have you, where I've been like, oh, this is something I'm really enjoying right now. And if you just present it like that, you'll obviously get the people who are like, this is terrible, this is garbage. You just ignore that. They've normally got like 2 followers anyway, who cares? If you just present the case as something where you're going to eventually get, like, it's like throwing out a fishing line, right? You're going to get bites where people, now that you're not going after their thing, even if they just inherently disagree with it, if they for their entire life they've been like, oh, I think Superman's terrible, I think Superman's boring. If they just see someone who's enjoying Superman, there's a part of them that's like, it's like kind of like you see someone eating like a really good ice cream or really good food, you just kind of peek over the side of his shoulder, like, oh, they seem like that's pretty tasty. I kind of want to buy that. Like, you know, they suddenly now are more receptive of hearing the other side. They're suddenly now a receptive of thing, and I think that's in a larger view of people. I think that's why stuff like video essays are so effective, because a lot of those that people really like listening to is just someone being very passionate about something they like in a very like long form manner, and people eat that shit up. People will be like, oh my god, I've never thought about this before, or I never liked this before, but now I want to check it out. Like Probably Not Mark, for example, has like an entire career based on just, here's this thing I like, this manga that I've recently decided to try, and here's 40 minutes of why I've liked this chapter or something, right? And people love it, gets millions of views. And I think, obviously, there's cases where you see a lot of attacks on things. Like the big YouTube thing is obviously like tearing something down for a ridiculous amount of time. So there's always like an underside to this. There's always kind of like a scummy version of it. But I think there is a positive thing in giving communities and creating kind of a space where people can share stuff that maybe did get a bad rap previously. And if they're honestly enjoying it, or maybe they've rediscovered something and want to have a genuine conversation about it, there are places like that. It is possible, people. Believe me, it is real. I've experienced it. And I would definitely recommend that as like a different way of engaging and because it's never going to go away. The social media is just never going to vanish. Like, so the best way I've found to manage it is just to get better. Well, Steve, not with that attitude either. Like this, my argument is just get better at it and get better at talking to people. And talking to people is my least favorite thing in the world. So when I'm saying that, it's really bad.
Something that you mentioned that I think is interesting is drawing this line between people who weren't around to experience something and then getting older and being able to talk about it, and how revisionism in like a fandom can turn into an industry-wide retcon, because that happens a lot now. My favorite example is Bucky, because when Ed Brubaker was a kid, he collected Captain America comics, but he collected the Tales of Suspense Captain America Forward, which was all the stuff that happened when he got unthawed from the ice. And so that run of comics stops because it was a title that featured Captain America and Iron Man together, because neither one of them could sustain their own book, and then they like spun them separately. So Tales of Suspense ends, and then Captain America picks up with issue 100 and then goes forward. And Ed Brubaker, as a kid, collected those Captain America comics like that spun out of Tales of Suspense. And in Captain America number 100, he tells this story about how before he got frozen in ice, there was this big final battle with like Baron Zemo, and Captain America fell into the water, and Bucky died. And then Brubaker, not knowing what the history of that was, because how could you, spent most of his adult or teen life looking for Captain America 99, where Bucky dies. And surprise, readers, there is no such thing as Captain America 99 when Bucky dies. It doesn't exist. It's fake. But he thought it existed because he read Captain America 100, and Captain America talks about how Bucky died. So in his mind, he thought that existed, and when he was told it didn't exist, he took that as an invitation to say, well, okay, so then Bucky's not really dead, ergo I can make the Winter Soldier. And that's essentially his version of the origin of that character. But that is kind of like a revisionist sort of take of like, there is something that clearly did not happen that through implication was really, really important to this person, and they kind of just willed it into existence. And now you have the Winter Soldier, who is arguably more popular than Captain America at this point.
Yeah. That's interesting. I feel like Morrison is also a good example of this happening, where wait, no, that didn't happen? What? With Damien's existence,
yeah,
right?
he completely misquotes that page from Birth of the Demon.
Yeah, just like, wait, no, she totally, like, drugged him and they had sex and stuff, right? No, that didn't happen in that book. Huh. And I think, like, that's just a really interesting, like, human behavior, where, like, that Mandela effect of reading books and media, like, especially with these long-running characters for so long, it's kind of interesting where to talk about, like, actual revisionism and just kind of muddy the waters, right? Like, without looking it up, everyone phones down, listeners and podcasters here. Describe the Monopoly guy.
Top hat, like black tuxedo sort of thing, mustache, white guy.
Okay, anything else?
Bald.
Bald.
He's got like a cane, I think.
White,
Okay.
White mustache.
Yeah,
White
white mustache. He's like an older guy.
Okay. Does he have a monocle?
I don't
I'm gonna say
think
no.
so.
You are surprisingly right. No, you're surprisingly right, but also now you're wrong, which is really interesting. There was like this. It was like a really big Mandela effect moment of people going, "The Monopoly guy has a fucking monocle," and then just like looking at the Monopoly guy, and he fucking didn't. It's like that another like a classier example, I guess, would be the picture American Gothic. The farmer and his wife standing in front of the farmhouse. He's holding a pitchfork.
Oh, yeah.
Does he have a hat?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he doesn't. But, like, just part of the cultural impact of that image, people thought he had a hat. But to take it back to the Monopoly guy thing, the image of the Monopoly guy having a monocle, like the Jim Carrey movie, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, he punches out you look like the Monopoly guy, punches him out, carries him around on his shoulder. That guy's wearing a monocle, like, because they needed to make him look more like the Monopoly guy, so they put a fucking monocle on. But like the cultural image of the Monopoly guy having a monocle became like so grounded that newer versions of Monopoly, now the Monopoly guy has a fucking monocle.
That's fucking great. I love that. He just willed it into existence.
Right? It's such an interesting like history. And there may have been like some early versions of the game where he did, but like the vast majority of printings, no, he never had one. So it's so fucking fascinating. That like mistake of revisionism, and I'm curious like how many examples of that there are where it's just like, even though this thing never actually happened within a franchise or whatever, people just assumed it did for so long that eventually it just became a thing. There's never like actually a story where it was established. It just one day it was there because people just associated it so hard. And I think there's like interesting examples of that where like Arnold Schwarzenegger's career I find really interesting because if you want to make like a quintessential cheesy action hero parody, you that like just goes to show how like bad and schlocky those 80s and early 90s action movies are, you do a parody of Arnold. But like when you actually look at the majority of Arnold's career and all of his like best known movies, they're all like top of the genre, like subversive and interesting films. It's also like he's not in generically bad action movies.
It's interesting too because he's in The Last Action Hero, which is very much playing on that image of who Arnold was, who he probably wasn't actually.
Right? I just find that like those perceptions versus reality becomes reality kind of thing. It's a very interesting progression of events. Yeah, fucking weird. I'm trying to think of other examples like the Monopoly guy one. It's so funny.
One of the things with like revisionism and canon too that I think is a little frustrating is you're always going to have your take on a thing because of how you remember it and the stuff that you read and the stuff that you like. But with comic book people in particular, we're so fucking bad at letting other people have that if it contradicts even slightly with ours. And then we go on these arguments or tirades about like how we remember it is how it is, and then cherry pick the stuff that we like to just justify that, instead of just assuming that like any other human being, they have their own favorite things and they're cherry picking those things to like it. So like there's a lot of who Batman is and who the Batman rogues are that is very, very recent. And when I say recent, I'm talking like 90s forward. Like a lot of what people's cultural perception of what Batman is kind of frozen in time for a particular era of like the 90s forward. And a lot of the older stuff doesn't adhere to that. Like the fact that we reinvent the Riddler constantly, like every 5 years there's a new Riddler take or something. But like whenever
and we had the perfect one and we abandoned it.
We abandoned
Riddle
it
me that was
too.
robbed.
We abandoned it real quick, like 2 arcs.
Yep.
But we all have this and we all accept this. But then when someone wants to put something on paper or screen that doesn't match what we want, we pretend like that human being isn't allowed to do that. And it's a little bit frustrating. I think people who are endlessly frustrated with like Tom King comics do this a lot, where they'll be like, no, Booster Gold is this, because I read these comics where Booster Gold is like this. But then Tom King's like, yeah, but I write them like this, because I like comics that are like this. And then they're like, no, you're not allowed to do that. Only I'm allowed to do that. And like you get this all the time whenever like a new run starts or a new movie comes out, where people are just like, that person is not allowed to have a take, because the only person that's allowed to have a take is me, which I form by reading other stuff. And if they don't read exactly what I read, then they don't understand the character, even though they were reading things where the character appeared.
Mm-hmm. Man, imagine if someone just made a movie adapting like all of the worst Batman stories.
Let's go. I'd watch the shit out of that. Let's go. Hush Returns, the movie. We don't even...
It's like, yes, this is a valid interpretation of Batman in that it is adapting things that actually happened. However, did you pick the right things?
I love.
There's no accounting for taste, but
I love the Batman, but to an extent, I think the Batman is that. The Batman is an adaptation of every bad
that's
Batman
the joke
comic.
I was making.
It's so good.
That was the joke. That was the joke, Steve. Thank you for coming along for the journey.
But like, Hush, Earth One, all that stuff is bad, but that movie's so good.
Right.
So good.
Man. All right. Is there anywhere else to go with this one, or do we feel like we covered a pretty good amount of the gambit here?
Does anyone have a favorite revisionist take or something that you have turned around on?
Okay, so mine is like Man of Steel, and I guess like very quickly Batman vs Superman, but like the app. I was a big Man of Steel defender for a number of years. I remember getting into like 3 hour long arguments with you about that movie, Steve. And like,
which is weird because I liked it a lot too, and I just changed my mind quicker.
yeah. And like, so I remember like defending it like crazy and arguing about it. And I will still say that like of all of the movies, Man of Steel is the one that you probably can defend the most of the Snyder DCEU films.
I would agree with that.
But like after watching BVS, I was like, well, I like a lot of what's going on in this. And then like after sitting on it for a while, I'm like, no, but that's the problem. I like a lot of what's going on under the surface of Man of Steel too. But then as I start to think about it more and like get into the weeds and the particulars, I realize it's just got like good ideas, but it's the actual movie is shit. And that's how I ended up like completely turning on BVS, like not overnight, but it was pretty quick. I think I liked that movie for about 2 weeks and then I hated it. But like that one, and then retroactively Man of Steel suffered from it, and then everything Snyder released after that. It was so funny because like the other movies in the DCEU were like, these are the bad ones. I'm like, no, literally nothing is worse than BVS. Except maybe Suicide Squad, but even then, I don't know how the fuck you dropped the ball on Batman versus Superman, but somehow they found a way to do it. So yeah, I would say I became pretty revisionist, or not revisionist. I changed my mind pretty heavily. I don't know if I have like a no. Actually, it was okay. Here we go. Fuck it. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Van Helsing, and V for Vendetta were good the whole time.
I'll give you one of those.
I'll give you the one of those I've watched as well.
I'll give you.
Well,
one.
go ahead. Just give me the other two on credit.
You have to build up that credits.
Alfie, what about you?
Do you have any revisions, Alfie?
Oh, I mean, I gave one of mine up top with Bleach.
Oh, Sonic.
But
okay.
Sonic's the one that's never changed, but Bleach was the one that I've had appreciation for now. But the other one, I guess, which I'll say it just because it's funny because it contrasts your one, is I've become more in the wake of everything that's coming up and getting a chance to rewatch them, not recently, but in the past year, I am more in favor of BVS and Man of Steel at this point. I can see at least the positive parts of it, and those are films that if I put on, I don't have a bad time with it. I think they're interesting to talk about, and man, a superhero movie that's interesting to talk about, what a concept. So that gives it a lot. That gives it a lot of boosts for me where I am right now. As I like being able to talk about those films and talk about what went wrong, talk about the choices that were made, talk about how they act in the scene. I think just in terms of like visual power and stuff, I think Snyder still does a really, really good job of like displaying kind of what I want those super fast, super powerful characters to look like on screen compared to a lot of people. So that buys me a lot of credit as well. So visually and just in terms of being able to dissect what films influence, like the fact that you can list like, oh, he was influenced by Excalibur for BVS and that from there, like that just gives you a leg up from so many other things. Where like I went back and rewatched like the first Avengers or something, right? And I still enjoy the first Avengers well enough for what it is, but that aged worse, I feel like, than BVS has, at least in my opinion. So that would be my one. In contrast to Ian, is I've been more. There'll never be movies that I say like, oh, they're my favorites or anything like. But I have more of an appreciation for Zack Snyder's DCEU movies minus Justice League, than let's say like the duology, than I did previously.
Yeah, fair enough. I really like the scene where Superman says we need to give up hope.
Hey man, like
that's my favorite scene too.
Why not, right? Why have hope?
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know. This is an interesting one. This is fun. I was really expecting. Oh, did we not? I thought you said one, Steve.
I did not.
Oh, my bad.
No, you're good. If we're talking about something that I've changed my mind on, Superman Returns is one that I've kind of come around on a little bit. I still have a lot of problems with it, but I enjoy it more than I used to. The big one for me was probably the Rob Zombie Halloween movies, because when those came out, everyone was just raking them through the coals, me included. Like, for the longest time, I just didn't care about watching those movies. But over the last 2 years, I think Halloween 2, the Rob Zombie Halloween 2, not to be confused with the 3 other Halloween 2s, is actually the second best Halloween movie, honestly. Outside of just the original, I think it's genuinely the best. So that's really, really cool. I like appreciating those.
I agree with that, Steve. I'd never had any previous experience, but when we watched them on your recommendation, I really liked the second one a lot. I thought the second one was awesome.
Yeah, I think the second one is great. And then one thing that I've never changed my mind on, that I still hold to this day, and is very much, I think, the correct opinion, and this brings it full circle because it's Star Wars related, Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars, peak. Some of the best Star Wars ever. Peak fiction. So good. Never bad.
I fucking hate those so much.
So good. The Asajj Ventress Anakin fight in that is second best lightsaber fight in Star Wars.
It's interesting because I like Tartakovsky's action quite a bit, because I started rewatching a bit of Samurai Jack. I'm like, God, this is so fucking cool, but it's so just early 2000s, they'd never make it today kind of vibe. But man, I just fucking cannot stand the Clone Wars series.
Well, fair enough. I still really... I've been very...
I think it's because it's not an original property from him. I think that's what it comes down to for me, but that's neither here nor there. Also, I'd never realized this until watch it recently. Samurai Jack's voiced by Phil Lamar.
Yeah!
And I don't know, I'm not sure they'd get away with it today. I know a couple years ago they made the follow-up season for it for Adult Swim exclusive or whatever, but that's a little bit different.
Right.
I'm just I don't know if you could go into the studio today and be like, yes, we're going to make this movie or this series about a samurai and we want him to be voiced by this black voice actor. People are probably going to get pissed. Yeah, maybe.
I'd be interested in that, because when you look at certain fiction, it seems like there's a predisposition to either people of color or minority groups that really gravitate towards it, even though it's not representational of them literally. Black people really like Dragon Ball, but they also really like Samurai Jack and old school Adult Swim stuff. So I don't know if people would really have a problem with it anymore. I feel like people who are unharmed by it will have more of a problem.
They're going to be the loudest.
Yeah, they're the ones who are going to have the most problem with it.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's an interesting one. I feel like we'd be in a much different conversation if it were a white voice actor.
Yeah.
Yes. Than we are talking about a black voice actor, even though it's technically either one's not Asian. It's a weird thing to talk about. But at the same time, the series maybe gets a lot of credit because they have what's his name, Mako, do the voice of Aku. And just it's hilarious how he just leans full into what if it were anyone else, it would be the most racist Asian accent ever. But it's so fucking cool because it's Aku. thousands of years ago, it just fucking hits, man. Every episode opens with it, too.
I still got that preamble memorized. I could literally cite it off verbatim. It's so good, dude.
It's so cool.
Long ago in a distant land, I, Aku, the shape-shifting master of darkness, unleashed an unspeakable evil. Anyway.
I love that.
It's so good, dude.
Alright. I think that's gonna do it. Stay tuned for next time when we talk about Samurai Jack.
Let's go.
I can't watch a whole TV show. Maybe like the first couple episodes or something. If you guys want, we'll see. Someone will pick something. We'll be back next time, and that'll be that. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. It feels so good to be back. I had a really successful episode because it didn't wake up my daughters. Yay!
Oh, yeah.
Until next time, I'm the philosopher.
I am the geek for fun. Or the champion of the oppressed, I guess. I forgot my tag.
And I guess if we're gonna play this, I am the oppressor.
Okay, and we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.